The views expressed by the speakers are their own, and neither their employers nor the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists and its subsidiaries are responsible for them.
To explain who I am, what I do, I tend to advise organizations of all sizes and all types on how to do effective marketing communication strategies. And I'm obsessed with discovering what works. And one of the things I find really interesting is we now have about 50 years of academic research on how to communicate effectively. And in recent years, it's been joined by evidence from digital marketing that helps us do experiments the whole time, rather than in the artificial sense that an academic would traditionally have done one. And that's the sort of lens through which I see Trump. So I was advising Best for Britain in the 2017 general election. Two different ads, almost exactly the same. One of them was 47% more efficient than the other. And the cumulative evidence we have of these academic studies combined with evidence from digital marketing over the last 20 years now means we can learn some quite effective things about what makes people like Trump effective, and we can steal them and use them for ourselves. That talk was originally designed for an offline audience, and so I'd actually ask people to put their hands up if they thought Trump was smart. And I think in many ways, Trump is a terrible, terrible individual, probably the worst president America's ever had, but he's an extraordinarily good communicator, extremely effective. And really, for somebody who is that appallingly flawed in so many ways, to have, despite that, become American president, I think is actually quite an interesting thing to question. So I'm going to focus in on three things that Trump does the whole time that I think we can all steal for our everyday lives. And the first one of which is his communications is super simple. And our brains tend to confuse things that are easy and simple with being good. Basically, our brains are lazy. And so at some subconscious level, the easier something is to understand, the more we like it. So this is an academic study from some years back. If you give people a choice of trying to work out which one of these statements is true, the majority of people consistently go for statement A, simply because it's easier to read, because it's in bold. By the way, both are lies. Studies of how people interpret language show that longer words make you look stupid, because people find them harder to understand. So you want short words, you want short sentences, short paragraphs, lots of repetition. And so if you apply this to Trump in his 2016 campaign, you only had to be about 11 years old to understand a typical Trump speech. I analyzed a Trump speech for this, versus about 15 years old for Clinton. Clinton's speeches are pretty well written, actually, but you could be much, much younger to understand a Trump speech. Similarly, Clinton's speeches had vastly more words per sentence than a Trump speech, again, making them slightly harder to understand. So I'll just give you an example from the Trump speech that I analyzed to give you a feel for what a Trump speech actually feels like. Because often people like us generically being people in Britain who might work for charities, we only ever see the terrible things he says, not the raw feed, which is weirdly a bit more positive than you might expect. So here's the Trump speech. And it's stronger today. And it's a lot stronger today than it was 2.5 years ago. I can tell you that. A lot stronger today. A lot stronger. $700 billion we've spent, and then we spent $716 billion. That's with a B. And this year it's $738 billion. So we rebuilt your military and it's stronger than ever before. Put that together and it's stronger, 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 more, stronger. Really, really simple message there from Trump. It takes 10 sentences to say it, but you don't, when you come away from it, you know what his message was. And it's very easy to understand. I suspect if you gave exactly the same message to Hillary Clinton, or indeed the vast majority of other communicators, you would get them saying this. There's exactly the same content here. Increase military spending by 5% a year, but it's a completely different form of communication. And that really works because our brains confuse simplicity and ease and truth and memorableness. All of those four things are the same thing from the point of view of our brain. As I understand it from the academics I work with, it's essentially because bits of your brain get wired together better if stuff is memorable. And therefore, it's easier for the messages to travel down those routes in your brain. Something psychologists call the mere exposure effect, which is, generally speaking, we are more positive about things we are more exposed to. For instance, the most popular brand in any commercial market is also always the most positively regarded brand. So simplicity is the first thing. Second thing that Trump is fantastic at is grabbing people's attention. He's sort of a world master at that. I'm sure this is completely unconscious because he's a toddler who's desperate for attention, but he's still extremely good at it. Cinco de Mayo, the huge Mexican festival. Trump photographs himself eating tacos in the Trump Tower. Now, as a message, that's utterly nonsensical in many ways. But the point about it is it picks a fight. It grabs attention because it's ridiculous. And for that day, you can guarantee that all of the people who pay attention to news in America will have talked about will be what it meant, whether or not it was good and whether or not it was bad. And the consequence of that is, firstly, he takes up more of your brain, so he becomes more familiar and more positive. Secondly, your opponent, in his case, Hillary Clinton, just gets less airtime with everybody because there's no space left of them. And therefore, they don't get to establish their brand. And thirdly, at some level, the things he talks about become the things that everyone else talks about. Really good example of this is the amount of money spent on advertising. In the 2016 election, Clinton actually spent $600 million on paid advertising compared to Trump's $300 million. She outspent him 2 to 1. If you include the free media he got, though, Trump actually had 40% more coverage than Clinton did. And that is simply because of Trump constantly grabbing the agenda every day. Similarly, if you look at top issues that people voted on the election, what Trump talked about skewed. So if you heard a bark, that's our new puppy growling at somebody. The issues that Trump talked about were the issues the public started to think about more and thought were the most important issues in the election. Some issues that traditionally really hadn't been discussed that much during American general election campaigns, like gun policy, came up to the top sort of 5. Other issues that traditionally were really important, like education, fell off the top list. And so the ones in red here are ones where the Republicans won. And of course, they skewed it towards the issues they won. They came very close to winning immigration too. Fighting is one of the best ways of grabbing attention. It's not the only way, but fighting is obviously something, again, Trump is particularly good at. And he's particularly good at it because both media, traditional media and social media, reward it. To give you an example, this is from a former client of mine, Change. When Facebook's computers see a picture of a baby, they are like somebody who can't speak Spanish. They don't know what it's saying about a baby. It's just a smiling baby. So the way Facebook's computers interpret that is hundreds and hundreds of interactions on social media. Likes, comments, shares, loves, etc. The interaction is taken by the computers to be a proxy for it being high quality. Therefore, they give it free reach. The problem is that the computers can't tell a fight from a baby. Both of them generate huge amounts of engagement on social media. And so both fights and babies get huge amounts of reach. Now, a world where we could distinguish between the two would be a much better world. I actually stumbled into this by accident a few years ago myself. I wrote an article for the New Statesman about how to win the argument on Brexit. It was very, very carefully considered about treating people who had voted for Brexit with respect so we could persuade people to change their minds, which is an extremely difficult job. Unfortunately, New Statesman put this picture at the top that probably didn't really fit the article quite so well. But when I put it on social media, it again got hundreds of engagements very, very quickly. And Facebook's advertising platform told me that it was the best piece of content I'd ever created. And it was the best piece of content I'd ever created because I'd accidentally created a fight. And fights are great for people like Donald Trump. They get to a lot of people for free anyway, but the social media platforms also give them cheaper advertising for doing it because they have very high levels of engagement. And of course, there's no space for everybody else. This is a really hard thing to counter. And I'm going to come back to how you counter that in a minute. I'm just going to show you 1 week in the life of Trump to show you how good he is at this. On Tuesday, Trump threatens to extend his term to past 2 terms if he gets re-elected, which he didn't, obviously. And everyone starts talking about how that would be unconstitutional. That's a whole day about Trump's second term. Wednesday, he fires his national security advisor saying, you're crap at Afghanistan. Thursday, it's his 9/11 anniversary. Anyone else would be treating it as a day of respect and mourning for the dead. Trump just keeps on with the previous day's fight. Trump is pretty much the sort of guy who'd start a fight at a funeral. Friday, Trump is seized with Democrats having their first town hall meeting where all the presidential candidates in their primary are fighting each other on a debate stage, and he hates the idea that Democrats might get any coverage, so he goes live on TV at the same time, heckling them point by point. Saturday, he appears to have a day off and goes golfing, so nothing happens. And Sunday, he comes back to threaten war with Iran. Monday, picks a fight with the media. Always a good thing to do if you want to get media coverage. Every single day, pretty much, apart from the odd day he went golfing, Trump would successfully game the media and social media into reporting on his fights and getting drawn into his mad toddler world. And I think if any of you are fans of the South African comedian Trevor Noah, you'll know he always says that Trump is a toddler. And that the thing about a toddler is you can't win an argument with a toddler. All you do is you end up being drawn into their terrible toddler world. The only way to win the argument is not to take part in it in the first place. And that's, I think, a real dilemma for people like us when our opponents often pick fights. Sometimes you can counterattack, but you have to counterattack so far hard you do win the argument. And that's really hard. Sometimes you can try and ignore it and train all your friends and allies to ignore it. I would suggest progressives have been very, very bad at doing that. Biden's campaign, though, were extremely good at doing it. One of their strategies was to entirely ignore Twitter. Thirdly, you can try and lobby the media not to fall into this trap, something that's not been successful so far. And finally, you can try and make it expensive. Sometimes there will be legal ramifications of picking fights, and you can make it embarrassing. Funnily enough, I originally took the screenshot before Kamala Harris was vice presidential candidate. Kamala Harris actually has really good instincts on this about how you turn the tables on people like Trump by insulting them in ways so they get drawn into your fight. I'm aware I'm a little bit short of time, so I will quickly move on. The final thing that Trump does that is absolutely genius is to try and make himself look popular. If you read any social psychology, social proof, in other words, we do what other people do, is incredibly powerful. Humans are herd animals, and we apply that particularly to people who look successful and powerful. Facebook using advertising, I see that my friend Alan has liked a page about a battery. I'm more likely to buy a battery because of that. I'm 20% more likely to buy a battery because I've seen that Alan likes a battery. Trump does this in everything. He hangs out with celebrities the whole time, like Kanye West. He spent 30 years trying to get into films, including Home Alone 2. Had a major TV series for years, so obviously he was supposed to be a major decision maker. Early on in his career, when nobody had really heard of him, he constantly tried and made himself look like a bigger businessman than he really was. I found this picture from early on in his career where he was wearing a gold helmet for the opening of a building site. Probably quite bad at protecting you from falling bricks, but it looks like you're very rich. And obviously, huge crowds. And I think something that summed this up for me was something he said to a documentary maker many years ago, which was, you know what, do whatever you want when you're making a documentary about my family. Make fun of my kids if you need to. Just like to say, what sort of monster says that about their children? But just don't say I don't have that much money. And the only time Trump ever sued anyone was somebody who said that he wasn't as rich as he claimed to be. I'm just going to just quickly zoom through this because I'm aware we're short of time. Just to say, this is online. One of his speeches about how he's with the highest ranking and best soldiers ever. They have the best year ever, the best equipment ever, the greatest Air Force ever, the largest pay rise, the best trained people, the most beautiful uniforms, best army in the world, lowest veterans unemployment. And his peroration was, America will forever remain the bravest, mightiest, and greatest nation on the face of the earth. Which I think is obviously, as president, he felt very good about that. So obviously the thing he really hated was seeing inauguration comparisons between him and Obama. So just to wrap up, 3 things you can take away from that. And I'll go on to the last bit in questions, I think, to give people an opportunity to ask questions, which is buying Greenland. Absolute genius communications. Firstly, it's a simple idea. It's just like buying a house. It's just much, much bigger. Secondly, it grabs attention because there isn't really a much bigger idea than buying an entire country. And thirdly, it's exactly the sort of thing you'd do if you're really successful, would be to buy the biggest thing you can possibly imagine. And I have to say, if this was an advertising campaign, I think you'd call it one of the best advertising campaigns ever. And years afterwards, people will still be talking about this.